on, everybody? Thank you so much for coming back to another video. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about Daredevil. I've been wondering for quite some time when I was finally going to review this movie from 2003, starring Ben Affleck, Jennifer Garner, Colin Farrell, Michael Clark Duncan, and directed by Mark Steven Johnson, I believe his name is, who would go on to write and direct Ghost Rider, which is what he did with this movie. I'm incredibly happy to have my friend Michael from the Z Review here on my channel to talk about a movie once again. Last time he was here on the channel, we talked about Gravity with Sandra Bullock and George Clooney. And this time around, I asked him to revisit the 2003 Daredevil. We're going to hear from him in just a little bit, but you guys can find the link to his channel down below in the description box. Go give him some love. And let's go ahead and get into my thoughts on Daredevil. I can't talk about this movie without giving you guys some of my personal history with this movie, because this isn't just a movie that I've seen here and there. This is a movie that I actually have quite a fond attachment to, so there is a bit of a bias, but it's not really a bias that's gonna, ruin my review or anything like that. It's just something that I should at least mention, that I have a nostalgic place in my heart. That's probably the best wording. This is a movie that I have seen 100 million times. I remember going to see it for the first time in theaters. I was 10 years old, and this movie was perfect for me at the time. I was a kid who just loved comic book related things, specifically Marvel, and I'm still the same way till this day. I am a huge fan of Marvel comic books, the video games, the animated stuff. I just grew up loving Marvel. And the same with DC, but I just love Marvel and always have. Daredevil was always one of my favorite characters, whether he was in a video game, making an appearance in a Spider-Man animated series, or just reading his comic books. He's a character that has been really dark at times while also being pretty campy in different, iterations of the character. And when this movie came out, I was absolutely in love with it. Now, watching it today as a 28-year-old who, has seen a million movies since, I can easily say that this movie does not hold up all that well. There's a lot of moments in this movie, from the narrative to the dialogue to some of the performances and some just story decisions overall that don't work. There's definitely a huge layer of cheese on this movie. But what I can say about this movie, even though I just made those criticisms, is that I genuinely still enjoy this movie. That might be a hot take for some, because this movie gets a lot of shit, and I don't really feel like it's deserved. Now, what I will say is, if you've seen the Marvel Netflix series starring Charlie Cox as the character, it goes without saying that that show absolutely nailed everything that Daredevil is and really has become in the comic books. Now, whenever I hear people shit on this movie for being too campy or too cheesy, I do like to remind people that this dude ran around in a yellow outfit for a while, like yellow and red, okay? So it's kind of like the Batman thing. Sometimes people are like, he only can be dark and brooding. That's the only Batman that ever existed. But it's like, dude, homeboy used to have shark repellent on him, the Adam West show, some of the older Batman films, some of the older animated stuff. There's always been a layer of cheese to these characters. And I think that if you guys have been watching this channel for a while and hearing my opinions, you know that I like a drizzling of cheese in my comic book movies. Now, if a movie doesn't have that, I'm totally okay with it. I like seeing serious interpretations of these characters, because in a lot of these comic books, they have been taken to dark and serious places, and Daredevil is definitely one of those. He's very similar to Batman for me, where he has this very dark and sad, origin story, parents getting killed, and goes on to become this, character kind of wrapped around fear. With Batman, it's like the fear of bats, and just like the kind of like fear in general is like a huge theme with Batman. And then obviously with Daredevil, the whole thing is he's the man without fear. And I also want to mention that I remember for Christmas, I don't know if it was the year of 2003 or 2004, I was really crazy about this movie still. I watched this movie a lot. I mean, I wore out the DVD of this movie when I was a kid like there is no tomorrow. And I remember that we were doing a Secret Santa exchange thing at my school, and the girl in my class, a friend that I still have on social media today, her name's Tatiana, she gave me the Daredevil soundtrack. And boy, did I wear that soundtrack out like there's no tomorrow. And I still listen to every single song that's on that soundtrack today. Some of them aren't really easy to find because I usually use Spotify for music nowadays. But what I can say is that for the most part, so many of these songs just really speak to me. I still sing them, and definitely is indicative of the kind of music I was listening to at the time when I was a kid. But yeah, I love the soundtrack. You got songs from Evanescence, Fuel, Seether, Nickelback, and some of that might not be all that exciting for some of you, but I really do thoroughly enjoy the soundtrack of this movie, and I just remember listening to it so much. And I'm giving you all this so you guys know that as a kid, this movie spoke to me. This movie came out when I was 10 years old. This is a movie that for me at the time was kind of near the beginning of this just absolute, I don't want to say resurgence because there were still comic book movies, but comic book movies were slowly building to be what they are today. You know, if it wasn't for films like Daredevil, those earlier Spider-Man movies, those earlier X-Men films, which I have a special place in my heart for all of these, if it wasn't for all these movies, these stepping stones, some being hits, some of them being misses, we never would have gotten to things like Endgame, you know what I mean? So when I look at 2003's Daredevil, is it cheesy? Yes. Is some of the dialogue bad? Yes. Are some of the moments in this film just flat out cheesy and bad and the wrong way of cheesy, or wrong side of cheesy is what I meant to say? Yes. But I think this movie still tells a cohesive narrative. I enjoy the setup of Matt Murdock as a child. I really enjoy the young actor who plays Matt Murdock, and seeing him kind of, you know, become blind and having to figure things out. I really enjoy the journey of the character from beginning of the movie to the end of the movie. I think that Ben Affleck plays the role well. Now, compared to Charlie Cox just completely dominated the role, and now it's going to be hard to see anybody else take that role, because I think when it comes to just some of the banter between somebody like Matt Murdock and Foggy, who's played by Jon Favreau in this movie, all of that really works super well for me when I watch the movie. I enjoy the banter, I enjoy the characters, I even enjoy Jennifer Garner as Elektra. But when you look at these characters from the comic books or the way that they were interpreted in things like the Netflix Marvel series, yeah, I think without a doubt, you can't help but realize they definitely nailed it with those shows, and they've nailed it with the comic books, and this movie doesn't really do full justice to the comic books of Daredevil. But to say that this movie is full trash, like many do, is just something that I just have never agreed with. Now, I have plenty more to ramble about this movie, but let's go ahead and take a quick break from my thoughts and listen to what Mike from the Z Review had to say about this.
What's going on, guys? My name is Mike and I'm part of the Z Review, and I just want to thank my good friend Anthony Perez for giving me a chance to collab once again on his channel. It's so good to be back, and I'm so thankful for the opportunity. And today he's asked me to come on and talk about the 2003 movie Daredevil. Now, when it came to this movie, guys, I will admit I did watch it a couple of years after it originally was released in 2003, so maybe around 2008-9 time, when I didn't really think of movies as much as I kind of do like nowadays when I sit down, think about them, review them, talk about them, etc. I kind of just went into this and I thought, well, you know, that's pretty cool, that was a good time. However, my different thoughts now are a lot varied from back then. But yeah, we've got Ben Affleck in this as Daredevil, Jennifer Garner as Elektra, Colin Farrell as Bullseye, which we'll get to, and we've also got Michael Clarke Duncan as Kingpin. Now, one thing I do like about this movie, I will say, is the young actor Scott Tucker, who played the young version of Matt Murdock, and how we learn about how he becomes blind, and the backstory about he's only got a dad who is a champion boxer, and the whole premise of this movie as such is around his dad does eventually get killed, just a minor spoiler, and Daredevil's kind of focus is to protect the city, but also learns about a new villain in town called Kingpin. I quite liked how this film had a really dark tone. Now I watched it, I was like, oh shit. I did actually read after this, it was rated a 15 here in the UK, which does kind of mean like more violence and stuff, but I didn't actually realise kind of the dark, grittier tone it's set for like Hell's Kitchen, but also just kind of throughout, it kind of carried some of that tone, and it maybe doesn't get enough credit for, because at least it kind of went darker in the film, whereas nowadays with Marvel, we get a lot of light-hearted comedy stuff, which, don't get me wrong, is great. Personally, for me, I prefer DC because of that darker, grittier, more realistic tone. So yeah, that's one thing I liked about this film, guys. I thought they really execute that quite well. Now, I will also add this. I think that Ben Affleck himself did pretty good in this role. And I don't think he deserved the kind of criticism that he got for it, because at the end of the day, the guy got the script. I felt like he executed that pretty well for what he was given. And I still think he did deliver some kind of believability to the character. I will say this, guys, like the thing that I didn't really like about this movie, and where I think it does suffer a lot from, is that tone issue, because throughout the film they don't keep that tone. Don't get me wrong, you know, there is kind of odd signs of kind of you know, mixed in well with other tones. Sometimes it kind of wants to be a comedy. Sometimes I feel like it kind of leans into one being like a drama as such. And I really didn't think that works for me. I think if they just kept the tone kind of most of the film, where it's kind of dark, gritty, there was the odd joke, etc., I think it would have worked better. And another kind of two gripes I had with this was the fight scene between Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner in the playground. I just felt like that was just stupid. And I can see why they did that, and it established our two heroes of the movie. So in that sense, I completely get it. I just felt like, unfortunately, that fight scene, they try to play it off really cool, but when you watch it nowadays, it doesn't really hold up. Back then, kind of 2003 sort of time, you might think, whoa, you know, this is a great fight scene. One scene that really got on my nerves was when we get the Scott Terrors, the young Matt Murdock, and he then eventually has this confidence and he comes over to fight the bullies. I just felt like the editing was very choppy. Yeah, I was cringing at that scene. And why did they include Colin Farrell as Bullseye? That was probably one of the worst casting choices personally for me. Don't get me wrong, Colin Farrell is an awesome actor, but in this, they had a big bullseye target painted on his forehead or etched in on his forehead. And it just looks stupid. I just felt like it didn't add anything to this movie. However, I felt like they could have benefited massively if they focused on Wilson Fisk and built him up as a character, built him up as kind of this really mean guy. Because Michael Clarke Duncan has that presence about him in the movie. It just isn't explored that well to make him such a terrorizing threat to the city. And I just felt like if the focus on him had him kind of commit more deaths himself without actually revealing it was him, unless Daredevil kind of found some clues, I just felt like it would have worked massively more in favour of this movie. But yeah, guys, again, I just want to thank my good buddy Anthony Perez for having me on this video. I really do appreciate it, guys, and I really hope you enjoyed kind of my take on Daredevil.
A big thanks to Mike for being here in this video. Really loved hearing your thoughts on it, man. I'm glad that you also, even though you have some criticism, definitely agree that this movie is not as bad as some people say. I think people just like to crap on movies like this, but when you go back and watch it, especially today, kind of in a retrospective way, there's fun to be had. Some of the cheesy moments for me that maybe don't work with the film overall, because it's not part of this overarching narrative and universe, it's easy to just kind of watch those scenes, have a laugh with it rather than at it, and then just kind of move on. You know, there's some fun action sequences in here. Again, I enjoyed the soundtrack. This is very much of the time where comic book movies were using soundtracks for a score. Even though this film does have a score that I do enjoy, I enjoy the Daredevil theme in this movie. Is it as memorable as other things? No, but I enjoy it. This was definitely around that time where a lot of rock songs were being used as kind of filler for a lot of action sequences. You don't see that nearly as much today. Nowadays, typically movies like this will have their own scores done by some composer, which I believe is the better route to go. But I do really enjoy the soundtrack of this movie. I find it to be a good time. I think that, again, Ben Affleck, I think he does a good job as Matt Murdock. I think where he really loses me personally is all the scenes where he kind of has to act like he's blind. He doesn't really sell it all that well to me, especially when the glasses are off. He just kind of has like a cross-eyed thing kind of going, and it kind of is uncomfortable at times. It kind of looks like a cross-eyed cat at times. And I'm really only saying that because if you've seen the Netflix series of Daredevil, Charlie Cox is incredibly believable, not only as the character, but as the blind man. The mannerisms, the way that he interacts with his surroundings, the way that he acts to people saying things, or being able to know that somebody's in the room, but he doesn't know exactly where they are just yet. He sells you on the fact that he is blind, 110%. And so I think when you look at what Charlie Cox has done compared to what Ben Affleck did in this film, it's just night and day. So I can't help but notice it more when I watch this movie now. Because as a kid, you know, it's kind of, oh, Daredevil, yay, this is cool. But I can't help but notice that. So there's definitely this cheesy element to this film and some of the performances. And again, I don't think that it does full justice to these characters from the comic books. But I think for the most part, Ben Affleck does give a good performance. I enjoy the journey. This is a film with a cohesive narrative that you can follow. Sure, there are some things that are kind of jam-packed in here and it feels a little muddled at times, and there's definitely some unnecessary characters that are just kind of plot devices, but I do enjoy Jennifer Garner and Ben Affleck, and I believe the chemistry that's slowly building between Matt Murdock and Electronautios. A little cheesy. That fight in the playground does not work at all in the film when you go back and revisiting it today, but I do thoroughly enjoy them. Let's go ahead and move on to some of the other people in this film, like Colin Farrell playing Bullseye. Now, people give this character a lot of shit because he's got the scarred, target on his forehead. And I think it's kind of hard, right? Because Bullseye, even though he was also in the Daredevil show and they handled it way better, he is a very cheesy character. This character that never misses, that throws and shoots things, and it has perfect accuracy. And in the comic books, he's a very over-the-top character that wears this, onesie with a freaking, target on his head. And so it's like, I could see them trying to do that early 2000s edgy kind of interpretation of him. I do like Colin Farrell in the role. I wish they would have given him more to do. Rewatching the movie today, he's just kind of there as a plot device, as something to kind of move the story around. But he himself doesn't really have a character that's kind of developed over the course of the film. And that will move on to my next thoughts on the film, which is Michael Clarke Duncan as Kingpin. I really love his interpretation of Kingpin. I think he's a really cool Kingpin. He fits the part. He's menacing, but he's just not given a whole lot to do. So I think the biggest downfall of this film is that the villain element of it, though the threat is, set up and what's at stake, I think the villain side of things could have been developed a lot more, but I really do enjoy all of the villains as far as the casting personally. And I think that Michael Clarke Duncan played a really cool version of the Kingpin that I wish they would have explored a little bit more. So going back and watching this movie today, is it amazing? No. There's some CG that doesn't work. There's some dialogue that doesn't work. There's some story choices that don't work, but I love the soundtrack. I enjoy it. It's a good, fun watch for me. I've never been bored watching it, and rewatching it today, it was a nice nostalgic watch. I do say all of that, and I said all that stuff at the beginning just to let you guys know that I am very aware that some of you may want to shit on this movie in the comments. And if that's the case, that's totally okay. I definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. So do you like this movie? Do you not like this movie? Definitely can't wait to hear what you guys have to say. Again, thank you to Mike from the Z Review for being here in this video. His link to his channel is down below in the description box. He's got great content going on over there. He's a slowly growing channel that has tons of great stuff going on over there. And I want to get his channel in front of more eyes. So please go give him some love. Thank you, Mike, for being in this video. And to each and every single one of you guys, comment your thoughts. Do you think this movie is hot garbage, as many say? Or do you think this movie gets a bad rap that doesn't really deserve? So definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. Comment your thoughts, hit that like button, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.